at this time in the term, I find students get a little bit stressed and anxious, and then I ask them to do something new and different, and they have trouble. So I am going to quickly go over this adult learning annotated bibliography and hope that it helps you understand what you need to do and gives you a little bit of an idea of how to do it. So at the beginning, obviously, you need your research question. Always, always, always your research question. And I gave feedback on research questions to everybody, so I'm hoping that it will be more focused even than Brian's here, because he should have completed his comparison. Do adult students make better learners than younger students? Is implicit in that question. But now that we've done comparison, you know that comparisons need to be completed. Anyway, this first paragraph is really the context for his readers. He has read for 6 weeks about adult learners, and these are the interesting things he's found out that make the question relevant and interesting. And first of all, people are returning to school and training after being in the workforce. And there are many reasons for that. So he reviews some of the reasons. And then he defines what he means by mature students and says there's good and bad things about being an adult student. And one of the things is they're more mature and they have experience, but they have more challenges than younger students because they have to balance life, vocational commitments, and other demands. So they are very stressed. But despite the difficulties of going back, there is a reason for many adults to go back to school. Okay, you have some of this context written already. It was probably in one or other of your essays, but it probably needs a bit of revision now that you have a fuller answer to your question. But your readers need context, and in a very few words, that's what Brian has given. Now, the next paragraph is the new one. It's called the literature review. Okay, it's a new genre for many of you, but if you've been reading journal articles, you'll notice they're there, because essentially what researchers say, well, before I really go into detail about what I have to say in answer to my research question, this is what those who came before me have said. And sometimes academics read hundreds of articles to do a literature review. You may have read 20 or so and chosen the best 8. So this is basically a summary of the trends and issues that have motivated adults to return to school from the researcher's perspective. And you'll notice it's some of it's very similar to what Brian has said before. People are going back to work as adults. But the important parts I want to point out here are the chunking of the researchers together. So we have his first point, that globalization and technological changes have made people come back to school. And you'll notice that he has a chunk of his authors, 3 of them, Cassworm, Merriam and Carafella, Schofield and Dismore, who mention things about globalization and economic changes that make people go back to school as mature students. And he adds, that sometimes that happens as many as 7 times from a separate article, but related to the previous. So I've made that green. And this is one author whose last name happens to be Parker Adams with no hyphen. Okay, so that's the first chunk of information that he's found over 4 of his sources that they say reasons why people go back. Okay, the second chunk of information from his expert sources is the difficulties that adults have when they go back. Time commitments and paying for school, right? And 2 people obviously have something to say about that. And you notice there's some overlap. Castworm et al. Talk about why people go back, and Castworm et al. Say why it's difficult for people to go back, but there's a second one who also says something about that. So it's basically saying these are the main issues that help me answer my research question, and this is what the experts are saying about it. And then there's yet another chunk of information from his sources that explains why they go back, and the advantages they have to go back as adults. And again, you'll notice some overlap in the authors. We've got Parker Adams, Castworm, Schofield, and Dismer all say that there are distinct advantages to being a mature student. And then he summarizes the list of advantages. And this is from all of his sources. So it's not plagiarized. And also, he wants to finish with advantages because, full disclosure, Brian was a mature student going back and he wanted to know it could happen. Okay, now this last sentence is a necessary sentence for all of you in your review of the literature. It's basically a transition. What came before is, okay, this is an interesting question, and these are the things I think are interesting about it. This is how the experts have answered my question. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit more detail about how those experts have answered the question. And this part here is what you will recognize if you've done any annotated bibliography before. This is what an annotated bibliography really looks like. So you use your APA format for your source, which is called a reference, and then this little summary, which is called an annotation. And you do it for each of your sources, all the way through from A to Z. Somehow this got stuck together. Okay, all the way down, source summary, all the way through to the end. And then there's this other weird thing that I make you do, which isn't always used in an annotated bibliography, but this is your conclusion. So I said, okay, there's a few studies that I've looked at. Obviously, I'm a student, so I couldn't read 200. And he helps, these sources all illustrate. Remember, they say there are, he says at the beginning, there's advantages and disadvantages, but he wants to talk about advantages. So mature students are more proficient and focused and more likely to complete their education than younger students. Yay, I'm 40 years old, I'm going back to school, I hope I can do it. And then a summary of the reasons why they're more likely to complete it: education, work experience, good time management, support services, etc. Help them do it. And this is his tentative thesis, which I hope he will use for his research paper. Okay, so they have, do they make better students? He asks. Well, they have significant advantages, right? And he says what they are. And they also, whoops, have a strong motivation. So do they make better students? According to this thesis, yes. Adults have a significant advantage and they have strong motivation. Therefore, they probably make better students. Now, this thesis makes sense in this annotated bibliography, but don't think that it's finished yet, because as you draft the final paper, the thesis may change and focus and direction. But remember, you can use all the words that you've written so far in any of your papers to draft your final paper. And what happens in Essay 4, your research paper, is this thesis doesn't go at the end. It goes up here at the beginning, somewhere in your first or second paragraph. And the literature review should be your second or third paragraph. So even though you have gotten credit for this in your annotated bibliography, you can reuse it in your final essay. Anyway, if you have any questions about how this thing goes together, I have annotated the CAT essay. So if you work better with just looking at things on a screen that don't move, look at the sample CAT annotated bibliography.